more for you, you feel it. You know it. This is your life, and it's time to go from contender to champion. This is The Show with John Madsen.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm your host, John Madsen. This is The Show. Super excited to bring you another episode. I have something that I think you're going to truly enjoy. We're going to go into heavily the growth mindset and how much peace and freedom that can give you in your lives if you choose to explore it and adopt it. Right now, this episode is being recorded during this Simone Biles, the USA gymnast participant who was absolutely one of the greatest gymnasts in the world, who took herself out of the competition in the name of protecting her mental health and also, in her mind, giving her team a chance to win a medal because she knew that she wasn't at her best. Now, I don't have all the details, but I'm going to give you perspective on this topic, and I think you're going to enjoy it because we're going to talk about this story, but we're also going to talk about how that applies to you in your career, how that applies to you parenting your kids in sports. I'm not interested in armchair quarterbacks thinking that they know what was cowardly or what was heroic. To me, that's irrelevant. To me, I'm going to explore this with this understanding of the unconscious mind and the unconscious mind's ability to protect the ego at all cost. And that comes with a cost. So we're going to dive into that. Before we do, I want you to go to johnmadsen.com. Explore the site a little bit. I tell you that every time, but there's some things that we're launching that's going to be truly epic. Everything is changing in the next couple weeks as far as design and all that stuff, but get on our newsletter list so that you can be kept up to date on all things Superhuman and all things The Show. Let's dive into today. So right now, there's, like everything else in the world, two distinctly different philosophies, or opinions, I should say, on what actually happened with this USA gymnast, Simone Biles. Apparently, and again, I don't watch a lot of TV. I'm not really reading everything about it, so I might leave out important details, which is fine because it's not really, this episode is not really about me getting every single thing right. It's just about shedding light on something that will truly, truly, truly fucking change your life, right? And I wish I had the chance to have a conversation with this young gymnast a while ago so that we could explore this, right? So this gymnast had an identity and she was crowned the greatest of all time. And she is a true athlete, right? If you've ever watched her compete, her strength, her power, her grace, her everything is just off the charts. So during the Olympics, and I don't know exactly what happened, but at a certain point she withdrew from the competition. And there's people online saying that is the most heroic thing that a person could do. She realized that there was something going on in her mindset. Her mental capacity was not where it needed to be. And realizing that, she withdrew from the competition, allowed another gymnast from the USA to step in, and in her mind, gave the USA team a chance to medal by taking herself out because she knew that she didn't want to cost her team, all the girls who have worked so hard for this one moment, a chance to medal. So 50% of the United States is like, that's heroic. I can't believe she did that. That's why she's the greatest of all time. Most people wouldn't have done it. They would have just gone out there and burned it all down. And possibly there's talk about her knowing that because her mindset was not in the right place, that she was actually putting herself in danger by going out there and performing some truly dangerous stuff. Okay, so there's that piece. And then there's the other school of thought that believes this is cowardly, that if you're the greatest of all time, that no matter what is going on, you put yourself out on the fucking mat and you do it to the best of your ability, and whatever happens, happens. Because if you don't, you're a quitter, and quitting is cowardly. One of my favorite quotes by a person was something that Mike Tyson's trainer, Casado, used to say. And he said that there's a really fine line separating a hero and a coward. And if you think about this, it's one of the truest statements that a person could ever make. I don't know what Simone was feeling. I don't know at all, because that pressure on that stage is something far bigger than I've ever experienced. Now, for me, I do know this. I do know what it feels like to stay at a hotel the night before a game in a different city or even in the same city that you play for. And I do know what it feels like to wake up and go to the pregame meal and to have all these different options for you to eat so that you can fuel up before the game. And I do know that I could get a plate of food and put a couple strawberries on there and only be able to eat 1 or 2 or 3 strawberries 4 hours before the game because I was so nervous that I felt almost sick to my stomach. I do know that despite that, sitting amongst my teammates, some of them would do the same thing and others could have 5 cheeseburgers. Everybody handles pressure differently. And I do know what it feels like to board the bus, to put on a fancy $5,000 suit. I do know what it feels like to act like I have my shit together. And I do know what it feels like to put my headphones on and take that bus with police escorts into the stadium. I know what it feels like to sit in the locker room, to put eye black on my eyes, look at myself in the mirror, to be able to hear 50, 60, 70,000 people in the stands, to have a heart rate that's elevated, that's like palpable, to have sweaty palms, and to think to myself, why the fuck am I putting myself through this? I could just be like the rest of the fans, like the rest of my friends. I could buy a fucking ticket to the game. I could go be beer bonging beers out in the tailgate lot, stuffing my face with hot dogs. I could go to the stands and I could act like I knew what was best, and I could yell and scream about players sucking and how the quarterback sucks and how they should put in the backup and all this stuff that fans do, right? I do know that in those moments, I wondered if I could just exit the building and just escape where nobody could find me ever again. So I do know what that feels like. And so some people in the self-development world will tell you that, look, fear is just FEAR, false evidence appearing real. And that shit sounds good from stage. It sounds good on a piece of paper, and it sounds good on fucking Instagram. But anybody who's felt the feelings that I just described cannot deny the fact that that shit is real as real can be. It's real as real can be. And in other episodes, knowing what I know now, I could absolutely change my perception of some of those feelings and even change the fact that they exist or didn't exist by changing some mental pictures that I was playing in my head. That is true. I didn't know what I know now. However, I want to paint this picture of pressure. And this all is going to go back to this idea that our unconscious minds and Simone Biles' unconscious mind is a powerful supercomputer that takes in information and bits of information at a rate of like 1,000,000 times 1,000,000 bits of information per second. The unconscious mind is what right now you're listening to this episode in your car. And it's taking care of your heart rate. It's regulating all of your bodily functions. It is telling your body and your eyelids when to blink Because before I brought that up, you have no fucking idea whether you're blinking a lot or a little bit. It's in the background. Your unconscious mind is a computer working in the background, bringing up relevant shit when it's relevant. It doesn't want to overwhelm you with all the shit that's going on and needs to be done to keep you alive. So even as you're driving, it's filtering out all the stuff that you don't need to know and keeping you focused only on what you do need to know. Okay? So one of the biggest jobs of this unconscious mind, this supercomputer, is to keep your ego intact, is to protect yourself from you. And if you built yourself up in this fixed mindset mentality, where losing is not what you do at all, where being the greatest in the world at all costs is you. And it's been said that Simone Biles had a goat on all of her gymnastics outfits. A goat, the greatest of all time. This girl's identity and her ego and everything that she's ever known was to be and have this identity of the very best in the world. Now, I'm on this podcast and I'm not the best podcaster in the world. I have a multi-seven-figure business and I'm not the best businessman in the world. I have a family and there's probably a better dad in the world. Who knows, right? And I pride myself on having a business, a body, a family, and all the stuff of someone that's elite and exceptional. Right? That is part of my identity. But I know that chasing down this idea that any single one of you is the greatest in the world at a particular thing is flawed. If you want to be that, then part of being that is operating with this identity that you are the greatest in the world. But it's going to come with a cost. And that cost is ultimately going to be freedom and the peace you feel in your heart. And the peace that I feel in my heart is more important than any piece of metal that I could win in a podium. And that right there is something you're going to have to work out in your head. And I'm going to give you a couple steps here in a second. I want you to think about right now whether or not you've ever had an experience where you literally had something that is truly big going to happen in your life, whether it's a job interview, whether it's a promotion, whether you started something that you were excited about, whether you had a big game. And if you've ever had chaos happen right before the biggest moment of your life or one of the big moments, or you've ever gotten sick, or you've ever gotten injured, I want you to think about this for a second and why this is so important. Your unconscious mind, the supercomputer, has the ability, and I can't prove this with science, but I know that you're going to think about, all the times that happened, that can't be consequence, right? That's not a consequential thing. I mean, coincidence. It's not a coincidental thing, right? Before I was going to play in the NFL, going into my senior year, the guru of all gurus in the NFL draft, Mel Kiper Jr., had a report where he had me as the number 4 receiver to get picked, which means that if I had a great season, that could very well mean that I'm a first-round draft pick with $1 million in my pocket, at the very least, a second-round draft pick. As the season went on, there was pressure mounting for me to live up to this identity, right, in this fixed mindset. And there was so much pressure that with 3 games to go, the pressure had to go somewhere. And I'm not saying that I created this scenario where I would break my leg and not be able to run for 10 months. But I'm not saying that I didn't either, if you know what I mean. So we can go down that rabbit hole, and we will, and I'll save that for another time, for another day. But I want you to think about whether or not you've ever had an experience where where I won't even say you've created, where chaos has appeared, or you got sick, or you got injured right before something happened. And here is precisely why that's important. The pressure does go somewhere, right? And if our unconscious mind's job is to protect our ego at all costs, it can have the power to create a scenario that will let you off the hook. If you go into a test, but you're sick, if you go into a competition, but you have a sprained ankle, if you go into a job interview, but there was been chaos in your family and you haven't gotten sleep for a week and there's another person in your family that's going through something, you always have the excuse that you weren't at your best. You went out there and you were a hero, but even if you lose, it's okay because you really weren't at your best. So that ego protects its identity of being exactly what you believe yourself to be. In Simone Biles' case, the greatest of all time. If operating out of a complete growth mindset where there is no failure, right? Where there is no failure, if she goes out and she loses, and her identity is not trying, her unconscious mind is not trying to protect her ego, she just loses. It's all good. Doesn't matter what anyone says. Doesn't matter what the world thinks. She went out, she gave her best on that day. Girl from another country's better. She wins a medal. I don't medal. Maybe I completely freeze up and everybody says I choked and this and that, but it's all good. I gave my best. It wasn't my day. Someone else wins. All good. Now, don't get me wrong. To be the greatest in the world and to play on that stage, to be like Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant or Simone Biles, you actually living in this with this identity that you are that is part of the reason you're that, right? And so what I'm about to say sounds really good in theory, but part of the reason the greatest in the world are the greatest in the world is because they have built that identity up over time, and it is in a way more on the spectrum of fixed mindset. But my point of this podcast for all of you listening, and I'm assuming that you're probably not the best in the world at anything other than being yourself, right? That if you operate that way, it's going to come with massive consequences. You're always going to feel the weight of the world in your job to provide for your family. If you were to lose, who would you be? And so, with that being said, your unconscious mind's power to create chaos right before stuff that comes up that's important shows up all the time. If you choose to chase down peace and freedom, and you're okay with losing sometimes, and you're okay with going out there and playing the best fucking game that you could possibly play, regardless of outcome, you will experience more flow. You will experience more happiness. You will experience more joy, and you undoubtedly will experience less pressure. So I'm imploring you to start to operate. And we just use this as an example with a growth mindset because it will set you free. If I would have known this back when I was playing, when I was 23, 24, 25 years old, the amount of pressure I felt would have been minimal. If I would have known all the pressure that I was putting on myself was caused by my unconscious mind's ability to protect myself from myself, I would have enjoyed the process far better. I would have competed at a higher level. I would have stopped competing for the critics. I would have stopped competing for the fans. I would have stopped competing for the newspapers. I would have stopped competing for any other person but me. If I would have given myself permission to just go out there and battle and do what I love to do, I would have experienced much more bliss, and I could have alleviated some of those consequences that I had to live with. Now, how do you shift into a growth mindset? I'm going to give you three questions, or three things to consider so that you can, as a parent, you can look at your athletes who might be competing in Little League Baseball, who's already putting pressure on themselves. Or if you're trying to climb the corporate ladder, if you're operating at the edge of your comfort zone, shooting for more, I want you to try to sit with yourself with these 3 things because it's going to truly help you in the long run. Number 1, a person has to understand who they're playing for. Who are you playing for? Why are you doing this? Are you playing for the critics to prove other people wrong? Are you playing for admiration from fans or your family? Are you playing for the people in the stands? Are you playing for the announcers of the newspaper, article writers? Or are you playing this game because you love it? Because you truly love competing? That's number 1. If I'm a parent in the future with an athlete that wants to play at a high level, my daughter's 3, so she hasn't really gotten into, a lot of sports yet. But there's going to be a time that I bet that she does. I'm going to make sure that the girl knows that she's not playing for daddy. She's not playing for my standards. She's not playing for mama. She's not playing for anybody. She's playing because she wants to compete. She wants to see what she's made of. And she's okay winning and she's okay losing. She is playing for her, right? When I'm doing this podcast, I don't give a fuck if there's 100,000 downloads or 2 downloads. When I started this shit years ago, I can go back and there was episodes from like 1 to 30 that was like 3 downloads, 4 downloads. I'm doing it for me. I'm playing for me. I'm doing it because I enjoy sitting in front of the camera and taking all these thoughts that are in my mind and crystallizing them into something that I can take with me forever. No matter what you're doing, whether it's career, what you want to achieve, a goal you have in fitness, a goal you have in business, who are you playing for? Who are you really playing for? If you're playing for everybody else, then you're operating with a fixed mindset. Number 2, what are you afraid of? I've hit this so many times on podcasts, and I'm not going to go into this in detail. It's obvious that people operating in a fixed mindset are afraid of failure. That's very, very surface, though. It's not really the failure that they're concerned with. It's the perception of that failure. In Simone's case, it's the perception of the world if she was to go out, operate at her best, and a girl from another country is better. That would crumble her identity, right? So if we were to be able to explore the root of that failure, then we can get somewhere. It's not just the failure, it's the perception of the failure, which ultimately means we're a little bit afraid of what other people are going to judge us by or criticize us by, right? But even deeper than that, one more level is, what are we going to think of ourselves? What if I go out and I lose and my whole identity is built on never losing? Who the fuck am I? Who am I? That thought, deep down in the unconscious, not consciously aware of it, because we've never really thought about it, is precisely the thing that's going to create the chaos and all the stuff that you don't need to go through before the big events, because it's going to protect you. Because when it does, even though it might not be the right thing in the end, in the moment, it protects you from getting that L, a real loss that you have to live with, that crumbles all the beliefs about you being unbeatable. If you don't explore that, and you don't explore where this fear comes from, if you have a child who gets super nervous before a game, and you don't explore what they're truly afraid of, then you're not going to be able to alleviate this pressure. The thoughts and feelings that I described about myself in the locker room in this episode, I believed I was afraid to fail. And in a way I was, but I never had the capacity or somebody help me get to the root of it. And if they did, and I was able to explore it, that pressure, the edge would have been off. The edge would have been off. There's so many things that wouldn't have happened that I could have lived with, that would have made it easier, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And then lastly, to operate in a true growth mindset, failure is just feedback. If you go out and lose, if your young athlete goes out and loses, it's okay. What did you learn? Where do you need work? What could you do better? You love the game, right? So let's go improve. Let's go improve. Give me that failure so I can use it as feedback so that I can win. In business, this is imperative. Everybody's running around trying to save face, trying to save themselves from themselves, trying to keep up this identity that they've built. If you just give yourself permission to understand that every single thing that happens is feedback coming at rapid pace, the bigger the goal, the more feedback that you're going to have. But feedback requires courage. Most people aren't willing to take the feedback because they don't have the courage necessary to accept it and grow from it. Think about those 3 questions. Who are you playing for? What are you truly afraid of? And take on this mentality that there is no such thing as failure. It's feedback. In your business, in your life, as a parent, make sure your kids understand it. Because we can alleviate pressure before it ever gets to the point where it's got to go somewhere. Think about that. Share this episode with somebody that needs to hear it. Take a screenshot, tag me, John Madsen Official. Would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you so much for joining us for another amazing episode of The Show with John Madsen. The greatest compliment that you could give us is liking, loving, and sharing this episode with all of your friends. So please go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star rating and review, and then share it online with everyone that you know. Make sure to tag John as well. He loves to hear from listeners of the show. The links for all of his socials and iTunes are in the show notes. Also, if you'd like to engage John for anything related to his coaching, consulting, or programs, please visit johnmadsen.com for everything you'd need to know on how to engage with John offline. And lastly, thank you for your time, your attention, and your consideration. This is The Show.